There comes a moment when money no longer feels like an external force beyond your reach and begins responding directly to the quality of your thinking, decisions, and actions. Most individuals never arrive at that moment. They pursue money endlessly, worry about it constantly, wait for the right circumstances, yet never truly understand what causes it to move toward them. At this stage, $10,000 may still appear distant to you, something dependent upon time, luck, or the arrival of a perfect opportunity, something difficult to obtain. Yet what if the distance is not real? What if the separation exists not in circumstance, but in the way you have approached it? Because money does not move at random. It responds to patterns, precise patterns of thought, behavior, focus, and direction. And when those patterns begin to align, progress no longer unfolds slowly. It accelerates, sometimes so quickly that it appears unexpected. You have likely witnessed this before. Appears unexpected. You have likely witnessed this before. Someone struggles for years with little visible progress, and then suddenly everything changes. Opportunities emerge, income expands, momentum builds rapidly. To observers, it appears to be luck, but beneath the surface, something much deeper has taken place. That transformation was never sudden. It was the result of an internal shift reaching a critical point, a threshold where the individual's thinking, actions, and positioning finally became aligned. And once alignment occurs, results begin to appear at a faster pace. Yet this is what most people fail to recognize. The shift itself rarely feels dramatic while it is happening. More often it feels uncertain, slow, frustrating. And because of this, many abandon the process before reaching the point where acceleration begins. They attempt something briefly, fail to see immediate evidence, and move in another direction. They restart, refocus, begin again. And each time they do, they destroy the momentum that was quietly forming beneath the surface. Because momentum is invisible in the beginning, it develops silently, it compounds gradually, unseen until it crosses a certain level of intensity. This is why progress often appears to happen all at once, even though it was forming the entire time. Now consider this carefully. What if the reason nothing has moved yet is not because the process has failed, but because you have not remained in one direction long enough for momentum to fully form? What if you were closer than you realized, yet continued restarting? Just before the breakthrough? That is the stage most people never recognize. They walk away at the exact moment persistence would have changed everything. Because attracting your first $10,000 is not about doing everything at once. It is about doing the right things with enough consistency for them to begin reinforcing one another. And once that reinforcement begins, the process accelerates. There comes a point where your thinking becomes clearer, your actions more intentional, and your decisions more precise. You stop guessing, you stop hesitating, and through that clarity, opportunities begin moving toward you rather than away from you. At first, the change appears small improvements, small results. Yet these small shifts begin connecting. One decision leads naturally into another. One opportunity opens the way for the next. And suddenly life begins moving differently than before. That is when progress appears fast. Not because it began quickly, but because you are finally witnessing the result of everything that was quietly building behind the scenes. Most people never experience this stage because they do not remain long enough. They demand immediate proof. They expect visible evidence at once. And when they do not see it, they assume nothing is happening. Yet something is always happening. The real question is whether you are allowing the process to build or interrupting it before it has time to take shape. So if money has felt difficult to attract, if progress has seemed slow, if nothing appears to be changing, there is a possibility that you are far closer than you think. You may simply not have remained long enough to see the result. Because once the right patterns are established, once your thinking, actions, and direction become aligned, progress does not merely improve, it accelerates. And when acceleration begins, what once felt distant starts to feel immediate. So before deciding that nothing is working, before changing direction yet again, Consider this carefully. Your first $10,000 may not be waiting somewhere far ahead in the future. It may be waiting behind a single shift that changes everything faster than you ever expected. There comes a stage in every man's life where his relationship with money begins to transform. Not suddenly, not through chance, but through a quiet change in the way he thinks, decides, and conducts himself. Before this stage, money appears distant and controlled by circumstance, opportunity, or conditions outside his influence. He pursues it relentlessly, he waits for it, he chases it, yet it never seems to respond in the manner he expects. Then something begins to change, not externally at first, but internally, he expects. Then something begins to change, not externally at first, but internally. The man starts bringing order to his thinking. He no longer moves in scattered directions. He no longer pursues countless aims at once. He selects, he decides, he commits himself to a course. And through that commitment, his thoughts gradually organize themselves around a definite purpose. This is the true beginning, because money does not respond to confusion. It responds to order. Most men never arrive at this stage because they remain divided within themselves. They think one way in the morning and another by night. They begin with intention, then abandon it at the first sign of uncertainty. They act, then hesitate, move, then retreat, and within this inconsistency, no force is ever created. The man who advances becomes consistent, not merely in intensity, but in direction. He no longer questions his purpose every day, he proceeds. And because he proceeds, something's his purpose every day, he proceeds. And because he proceeds, something begins to form. At first, it cannot be seen. There is no dramatic gain, no immediate reward. Yet his thinking grows clearer, his decisions become firmer, his actions more deliberate. This transformation is often overlooked, yet it is the foundation of everything that follows. Others frequently recognize it before he does. They notice the certainty in his speech, the absence of hesitation, the impression that he knows where he is going even when the full path has not yet appeared. They may describe him as confident. Yet confidence is not the cause. It is the result of organized thought, the result of definite direction, the result of decisions maintained consistently over time. It must be understood that money is not drawn to effort alone. Many men work hard, many exert themselves constantly, yet effort without direction produces little effect. It is like force scattered in effort without direction produces little effect. It is like force scattered in every direction at once. Powerful, yet ineffective. The man who attracts wealth begins concentrating his force. He directs it deliberately. He applies it along one clear line, and through that concentration, power is created. At first, this power remains invisible. It develops gradually and quietly. There may be moments when the man feels nothing is changing, that his effort produces no immediate return. This is the stage where most people withdraw. They mistake the absence of visible results for the absence of progress. They conclude that nothing is happening, yet something is always happening. Thought is being refined. Direction is becoming stronger. Action is becoming aligned. And although the result has not yet appeared, the conditions that create it are being formed. This is the distinction between those who continue and those who stop. One judges by appearance, the other judges by understanding. The man who understands does not require immediate proof. He knows that what he is building cannot yet be seen. He continues not because the result is visible, but because he understands that the result must eventually follow. And this understanding gives him an advantage. He does not change direction unnecessarily. He does not abandon his path. He does not change direction unnecessarily. He does not abandon his path at the first sign of delay. He remains committed. And in remaining committed, he eventually reaches a point where something greater begins to happen. His actions begin producing response. Small at first, almost unnoticed, a connection, an opportunity, a slight increase in return. Nothing dramatic, yet unmistakably different from before. This is the stage where money begins to respond. Not fully, but through signals. The man must recognize this stage because it is delicate. It can either strengthen or collapse. If impatience takes over, if doubt causes him to abandon his direction, he interrupts the very process that has begun forming. And when that happens, the response disappears. But if he continues, if he maintains his direction and strengthens his clarity, the response grows stronger. Others begin to notice. They see that opportunities appear around him more often. That others begin to notice. They see that opportunities appear around him more often. That people approach him rather than the other way around. That his efforts begin producing greater results than before. To them, it may appear as though circumstances have changed. Yet circumstances have not changed. The man has changed. He is no longer reacting to life. He is directing what follows. And this is the turning point where money stops being something pursued and becomes something attracted. The man does not stop working. Effort remains necessary, but his effort is no longer scattered. It is aligned, and aligned effort produces multiplied results. There comes a further stage in the advancement of a man where external results are no longer his primary source of certainty. In the beginning, he depended upon visible outcomes to validate his direction. A gain strengthened him. A setback weakened him. His confidence rose and fell according to circumstance. But over time, something more stable begins to develop. He learns that temporary conditions do not determine ultimate results. He understands that delay is not defeat, that resistance is not failure, and that uncertainty is often present before expansion. This understanding changes the way he responds to difficulty. The average man reacts emotionally to obstacles. When progress slows, he doubts himself. When opportunities disappear, he assumes the path has ended. His thinking becomes unstable because it is controlled by appearances. The disciplined man develops a different condition. He remains steady even when results fluctuate. He does not allow temporary setbacks to... The disciplined man develops a different condition. He remains steady even when results fluctuate. He does not allow temporary setbacks to alter his direction unnecessarily. He evaluates, adjusts where necessary, and continues forward without entering his purpose. This steadiness becomes one of his greatest advantages. Because in every field, the individual who remains emotionally controlled while others become reactive gains power over time. It must be understood that wealth is not created only through intelligence or effort. It is sustained through emotional discipline. Many men destroy opportunities not because they lack ability, but because they lack stability. They react too quickly. They panic during uncertainty. They abandon long-term progress for short-term comfort. And in doing so, they interrupt what could have become substantial accumulation. The man who advances learns to separate emotion from decision. He does not act impulsively because of fear. The man who advances learns to separate emotion from decision. He does not act impulsively because of fear. He does not become careless because of temporary success. He maintains clarity regardless of conditions. This gives continuity to his actions, and continuity strengthens momentum. Others will begin to notice this quality in him. They will observe that pressure does not easily disturb him, that he does not overreact when circumstances shift, that he remains composed while others become uncertain. This creates trust, and trust attracts responsibility, partnership, leadership, and opportunity. For men naturally rely upon those who remain steady under pressure. This is why emotional discipline becomes financial advantage. The individual who can think clearly during uncertain conditions will always outperform the one controlled by emotional reaction. While others stop, he continues. While others hesitate, he remains decisive. While others lose direction, he preserves it. And because he preserves direction, his progress compounds over time. Decisive. While others lose direction, he preserves it. And because he preserves direction, his progress compounds over time. It must also be recognized that emotional discipline protects accumulated gains. The man who lacks control may attract money temporarily, yet he often loses it through impulsive behavior, poor judgment, or inconsistent action. He builds, then destroys, advances, then retreats. The disciplined man operates differently. He understands that every decision either strengthens or weakens his future condition. Because of this, he becomes intentional. He thinks beyond the immediate moment. He values sustainability over temporary excitement. And through this approach, his results become stable rather than temporary. This stability creates a new level of confidence, not the confidence based upon appearance or praise, but the confidence born from self-command. The man knows he can rely upon himself. He trusts his ability to remain focused, disciplined, and confidence born from self-command. The man knows he can rely upon himself. He trusts his ability to remain focused, disciplined, and consistent, even when conditions become difficult. That form of confidence changes everything. Because once a man trusts himself, hesitation begins to disappear. He no longer wastes energy questioning every step. He acts with conviction. His decisions become faster, his direction becomes stronger, and this increased certainty allows him to move with greater effectiveness than before. Others may interpret this as natural talent or unusual strength, yet what they are truly witnessing is internal order. The man has gained authority over himself, and the individual who governs himself effectively eventually gains influence over circumstances as well. This is why true advancement is never merely external. Wealth without internal stability is fragile. Success without discipline is temporary. Opportunity without self-control eventually collapses under pressure. The man who continues rising develops strength inwardly first, then outwardly. His thinking becomes disciplined. The man who continues rising develops strength inwardly first, then outwardly. His thinking becomes disciplined. His emotions become controlled, his actions become intentional, and because these conditions reinforce one another, his progress becomes increasingly difficult to stop. It must also be understood that this process never fully ends. Each new level of growth requires greater discipline than the one before it, greater clarity, greater emotional control, greater consistency. The man must continue refining himself as his responsibilities expand. For every new level of wealth demands a stronger identity to sustain it. Thus, the journey is not only about acquiring money, it is about becoming the type of individual capable of managing increasing levels of opportunity, pressure, responsibility, and influence without losing direction. This is the deeper transformation few men fully recognize. Money is only the visible result. The true achievement is This is the deeper transformation few men fully recognize. Money is only the visible result. The true achievement is the development of the man himself. Because once the individual becomes disciplined in thought, stable in emotion, clear in purpose, and consistent in action, external results begin following him naturally. And when this condition is fully established, progress no longer feels forced. It becomes the natural expression of who he has become. Let him then examine not only his actions, but his reactions. Let him observe whether he remains steady during uncertainty or becomes controlled by temporary conditions. Let him strengthen his discipline until his emotions no longer govern his direction. For the man who masters himself gains an advantage that circumstances cannot easily remove. And let him affirm with calm certainty, I remain steady under pressure and disciplined in my decisions. I do not allow temporary conditions to control my direction. I remain steady under pressure and disciplined in my decisions. I do not allow temporary conditions to control my direction. Through self-mastery, I strengthen my results and expand my future. There comes another stage in the evolution of a man where he begins to understand that growth is no longer driven only by effort, discipline, or persistence, but by the standard he silently accepts for himself each day. At first, a man attempts to improve his results while leaving his standards unchanged. He desires greater income, stronger opportunities, and a more disciplined life. Yet he continues tolerating the same distractions, the same excuses, and the same level of thinking that created his current condition. And because his standards remain unchanged, his results eventually return to what is familiar. This is why temporary motivation rarely creates permanent transformation. Motivation can produce movement for a short time. Standards create identity. The man who advances begins raising what he permits within his own life. He becomes more selective with his time, more intentional with his attention, more disciplined with his habits. He no longer allows every own life. He becomes more selective with his time, more intentional with his attention, more disciplined with his habits. He no longer allows every distraction to enter his mind or every impulse to control his behavior. This shift appears small from the outside, yet internally it changes everything, because standards shape behavior automatically. The man no longer relies upon constant motivation to act correctly. His standards begin determining his actions before emotion has the opportunity to interfere. He no longer negotiates with himself each day about whether he should remain focused. Focus becomes expected. Discipline becomes normal. Consistency becomes part of his character rather than an occasional effort. This is where true stability begins to form. Most individuals continue operating according to low internal standards while hoping for high-level results. They desire financial freedom while remaining careless with their time. They desire financial freedom while remaining careless with their time. They seek opportunity while surrounding themselves with distraction. They pursue advancement while maintaining habits that weaken clarity and discipline. And because their standards remain low, their condition remains unchanged regardless of temporary effort. The man who rises understands something different. He recognizes that every repeated behavior communicates a standard. Every tolerated distraction becomes permission. Every excuse repeated often enough becomes identity reinforced through habit. Because of this, he becomes careful about what he repeatedly accepts. He no longer tolerates inconsistency in areas that matter. He no longer allows temporary emotion to dictate permanent direction. He becomes deliberate in thought, speech, and action because he understands that standards compound just as actions do. Small compromises repeated daily eventually weaken a man's entire foundation. Small disciplines repeated daily strengthen it. Others will begin noticing this transformation before fully understanding its cause. They will observe that the man appears more focused, more composed, less easily distracted than before. They will see that less easily distracted than before. They will see that he wastes less energy on things that produce no advancement. And through this conservation of energy, his effectiveness increases. For attention is one of the greatest forms of power a man possesses. Where attention flows, energy follows. And where energy is consistently directed, results begin to accumulate. The average man allows his attention to become fragmented. He reacts constantly to external noise, opinions, distractions, entertainment, and temporary emotional impulses. His focus is divided so frequently that little force is ever sustained long enough to produce meaningful progress. The disciplined man learns to protect his attention carefully. He understands that focus is not merely concentration. It is preservation of direction. Every unnecessary distraction weakens momentum. Every divided priority reduces force. Every moment spent reacting instead of creating delays advancement. Thus, the man who grows begins simplifying his life intentionally. He removes what weakens him. He strengthens what sharp advancement. Thus, the man who grows begins simplifying his life intentionally. He removes what weakens him. He strengthens what sharpens him. He organizes his environment to support clarity rather than confusion. And through this process, his mind becomes increasingly effective. It must also be recognized that higher standards influence the people surrounding the man. Some individuals will naturally distance themselves when he changes. Others will become uncomfortable with his discipline because it exposes their own lack of direction. This is normal. Growth often changes relationships before it changes results. The man must understand this clearly, so he is not discouraged when certain connections weaken as he advances. Not everyone is prepared to grow at the same pace. Not everyone desires the same level of responsibility, discipline, or transformation. The disciplined man accepts this without resentment. He does not attempt to force others to change. He simply remains committed to his own direction. And through that commitment, he gradually attracts individuals whose standards align with his own. This becomes another source of acceleration. Because environments influence identity, the people surrounding a man shape his thinking, expectations, habits, and level of ambition more than he often realizes. If he remains surrounded by confusion, distraction, and inconsistency, maintaining clarity becomes difficult. But when he enters environments built upon discipline, focus, accountability, and growth, his own advancement strengthens naturally. Thus, the man who progresses becomes intentional not only about his actions, but also about his environment. He chooses carefully what he listens to, what he studies, who he spends time with, what influences his thinking repeatedly. because he understands that standards are contagious. Over time, this creates a profound internal shift. The man no longer sees discipline. Standards are contagious. Over time, this creates a profound internal shift. The man no longer sees discipline as restriction. He sees it as freedom. Freedom from confusion. Freedom from wasted years. Freedom from emotional inconsistency. Freedom from the constant instability that prevents most individuals from building meaningful progress. And once he experiences the strength that comes from high standards maintained consistently, he no longer wishes to return to his previous condition. Because clarity feels stronger than distraction, purpose feels stronger than drift, direction feels stronger than impulse. This is when advancement becomes deeply rooted. The man is no longer relying upon temporary bursts of effort. He has changed the standard from which he operates daily. And because his standard has changed, his decisions improve naturally. His habits improve naturally. His results improve naturally. Not through force alone, but through alignment. Improve naturally. His habits improve naturally. His results improve naturally. Not through force alone, but through alignment. The first $10,000 often arrives after this shift has already occurred internally. By the time the money appears externally, the man has already become different inwardly. His standards have changed. His thinking has sharpened. His discipline has strengthened. The external result simply reflects the internal transformation that was built long before anyone else could see it. Let him then examine the standards he currently tolerates. Let him see clearly. Let him then examine the standards he currently tolerates. Let him see clearly where he has permitted distraction, inconsistency, delay, or weakness to remain unchallenged. And let him raise the standard he holds for himself quietly, consistently, and without compromise. For a man's life rarely rises above the standards he repeatedly accepts. And let him affirm with steady conviction, I raise my standards and align my actions with the life I intend to create. I protect my focus, strengthen my discipline, and through consistent elevation of my standards, my results continue to expand. There comes a stage in a man's progress where he begins to recognize that time itself is no longer something to be spent casually, but something to be directed with precision. In earlier years, he may have believed that success belonged primarily to those who worked the hardest or sacrificed the most hours. Yet over time, he discovers that many men remain busy for decades without ever truly advancing. The difference is not always effort. Often, it is allocation. The average man allows his days to be consumed by reaction. He responds constantly to urgency, interruption, distraction, and short-term demands. He moves from task to task without clear hierarchy, giving equal attention to what is important and what is insignificant. And because of this, his energy becomes diluted across activities that produce little long-term effect. The disciplined man begins operating differently. He understands that not all actions carry equal value. Some decisions create momentum that lasts for years. Others consume enormous time while producing almost nothing in return. And once he understands this distinction, he becomes increasingly selective with where his time is invested. This is where strategic thinking begins to separate him from the majority. He no longer measures productivity only by movement. He measures it by consequence. He asks himself whether an action merely fills time or actually expands future opportunity, whether it creates temporary activity or lasting leverage. Because leverage changes everything. A man working only through constant effort remains limited by his personal capacity. His income, influence, and growth become tied directly to the number of hours he can personally exert. But the man who learns leverage begins creating results that continue expanding even when he is no longer actively forcing them. This principle appears in every form of advancement. Knowledge becomes leverage when it continues producing value repeatedly. Reputation becomes leverage when opportunities arrive because of trust already established. Systems become leverage when organized processes continue functioning consistently over time. Relationships become leverage when strong connections create access, insight, and opportunity beyond individual effort alone. The man who understands this begins thinking beyond immediate reward. He no longer asks only, "What can I gain today?" He begins asking, "What can I build today that continues producing value tomorrow?" This question changes the direction of his entire life. Because once a man begins building instead of merely reacting, his future starts compounding differently. At first, the shift may appear insignificant. A new skill developed consistently, a reputation strengthened deliberately, a business system refined patiently, an audience built gradually, a network cultivated intentionally. None of these may produce dramatic results immediately. Yet over time, their combined effect becomes enormous. This is the hidden power of strategic accumulation. Most men focus only on immediate compensation. They trade hours for return repeatedly without building structures that outlive the effort itself. As a result, they remain trapped in continuous exertion. If they stop moving, progress stops with them. The strategic man builds differently. He understands that true advancement comes from creating assets, systems, skills, and relationships capable of producing value repeated over long periods of time. And because he understands this, his actions begin carrying increasing weight. One disciplined year changes the next 5. One powerful relationship opens opportunities impossible to predict beforehand. One valuable skill creates advantages that continue expanding for decades. One wise decision compounds quietly until its impact becomes impossible to ignore. Others often fail to recognize this process while it is occurring. They see only the visible result later. They notice the man's increasing opportunities, influence, or financial stability, but they do not see the years of strategic positioning that created those outcomes. To them, it appears sudden. To the man who built it, it was gradual and intentional. It must also be understood that strategic thinking requires patience, uncommon among most individuals. The average person seeks immediate emotional reward. He abandons actions whose benefits are delayed. He becomes discouraged when progress is not instantly visible. The strategic man develops a longer horizon. He willingly invests effort into outcomes that may not fully mature for years because he understands the nature of compounding. He recognizes that the greatest returns are often delayed precisely because so few people remain committed long enough to receive them. This patience becomes a competitive advantage. While others constantly restart, he continues building. While others chase quick results, he strengthens foundations. While others seek immediate recognition, he creates long-term value quietly. And over time, the difference between these approaches becomes enormous. The man who thinks strategically also learns to reduce unnecessary friction in his life. He organizes routines, systems, and environments so that productive action becomes easier and distraction becomes harder. He understands that relying purely upon willpower creates instability. Thus, he structures his life to support consistency naturally. This creates efficiency, and efficiency multiplies force. The man no longer wastes energy making the same avoidable decisions repeatedly. Important actions become habitual, priorities become clear, direction becomes stable. As a result, more mental energy becomes available for creation, problem solving, and expansion rather than constant recovery from disorder. Others begin noticing a difference in the way he operates. He appears calmer yet more effective, more focused yet less rushed, more deliberate yet increasingly productive. They may assume he has discovered some hidden advantage, yet his advantage is structure. He has learned how to align time, attention, energy, and action toward outcomes that continue compounding over time. This is why his progress becomes increasingly difficult to stop, because he is no longer depending solely upon motivation or temporary effort. He is supported by systems, habits, relationships, and structures designed to reinforce advancement continuously. At this stage, the first $10,000 no longer appears as an isolated goal. It becomes evidence of a larger transformation already underway. The man is no longer merely earning money. He is building a life capable of generating increasing value consistently. And once that foundation exists, expansion becomes far more natural. Not because the path suddenly becomes easy, but because the man himself has become increasingly effective. He thinks further ahead, acts with greater precision, builds with greater intention, and protects his direction with greater discipline than before. Let him then examine how he currently spends his time, where his energy is being wasted, and whether his daily actions are creating temporary activity or long-term leverage. Let him begin building what continues producing value beyond the moment of effort. For the future of a man is shaped not only by how hard he works, but by what his work continues producing after it is done. And let him affirm with deliberate certainty, I use my time with purpose and build with long-term vision. My actions create leverage, my discipline creates structure, and through consistent strategic effort, my results continue to multiply. There comes a point in the development of a man where silence begins to serve him more powerfully than constant expression. In earlier stages, he feels compelled to explain himself repeatedly. He seeks validation for his plans, approval for his ambitions, reassurance for his direction. He speaks of what he intends to build before he has fully built it. And often, without realizing it, he weakens his own momentum through excessive exposure, because energy scattered through endless explanation loses force before it is converted into result. The disciplined man gradually learns a different approach. He becomes more reserved with his intentions, not out of fear, but out of understanding. He recognizes that not every vision requires immediate discussion. Not every goal benefits from public attention during its early stages. Some things grow stronger in silence. This understanding changes the way he moves. He no longer feels the need to announce every step. He no longer changes the way he moves. He no longer feels the need to announce every step. He no longer seeks constant recognition for effort that has not yet matured into substance. Instead, he directs more energy toward execution than toward appearance. And through this shift, his effectiveness increases. The average man often confuses talking with progress. He discusses plans repeatedly, imagines outcomes publicly, receives temporary emotional satisfaction from being seen as ambitious, and mistakes that feeling for actual advancement. But discussion without execution creates illusion rather than momentum. The disciplined man learns to derive satisfaction from completion rather than intention. He allows results to speak where explanation once existed. He becomes less concerned with appearing successful and more committed to becoming effective. This distinction is subtle yet powerful, because the desire to appear successful often causes individuals to pursue. This distinction is subtle yet powerful, because the desire to appear successful often causes individuals to pursue visibility before foundation. They focus on image before structure, attention before substance, recognition before mastery. And when pressure arrives, what lacks foundation collapses quickly. The man who advances builds differently. He strengthens quietly before expanding publicly. He develops skill before demanding recognition. He creates consistency before seeking visibility. And because his foundation is real, his growth becomes sustainable. Others will notice this transformation in unexpected ways. They will observe that man speaks less impulsively, yet carries greater presence, that his words become more deliberate, more measured, more precise. They will see that he no longer reacts emotionally to every opinion, criticism, or temporary condition. This creates a sense of stability around him. For restraint is often interpreted as strength. The individual who governs his speech usually governs his thinking as well. And the man who governs his thinking acts with greater control than the one driven constantly by emotional reaction. It must also be understood that silence sharpens observation. The man who speaks constantly learns little because his attention remains focused on expressing himself. The man who listens carefully begins recognizing patterns others overlook. He notices behavior. He studies decisions. He observes consequences. And through observation, his judgment improves. This gives him advantage because life continually reveals lessons to the individual, and through observation, his judgment improves. This gives him advantage because life continually reveals lessons to the individual, disciplined enough to notice them. The average man reacts immediately to events. He forms conclusions too quickly. He allows emotion to interrupt perception. But the observant man pauses. He studies before deciding. He seeks understanding before reaction. And because of this, his decisions become increasingly accurate over time. Accuracy compounds just as mistakes do. One wise decision can create years of opportunity. One careless reaction can destroy years of progress. Thus, the disciplined man becomes slower to speak, slower to promise, slower to react emotionally. Yet, he becomes faster in understanding, faster in adaptation, and faster in recognizing what truly matters. Others may initially misunderstand this restraint. They may interpret silence as weakness or lack of ambition because they are accustomed to loud expression without substance. Yet over time, the difference becomes visible. The loud man continues speaking, the disciplined man. Yet over time, the difference becomes visible. The loud man continues speaking, the disciplined man continues building, and eventually, results reveal which approach carried real force. It must also be recognized that silence protects clarity. Constant exposure to opinions weakens direction for many individuals. Every voice introduces new doubt, distraction, or confusion. The man who seeks validation from too many sources eventually loses connection with his own judgment. The disciplined man learns to filter influence carefully. He does not accept every opinion as guidance. He understands that advice from those without discipline, vision, or results often creates confusion rather than clarity. Thus, he becomes selective about whose voice he permits to shape his thinking. Clarity. Thus, he becomes selective about whose voice he permits to shape his thinking. This selectiveness strengthens independence. And independence strengthens decision-making, because the man who constantly requires external approval will always hesitate at critical moments. His direction remains vulnerable to the opinions of others, but the man who has developed internal certainty can move decisively even when external validation is absent. This does not mean he ignores wisdom or rejects counsel. It means he chooses influence intentionally rather than emotionally. There is great power in this condition. The man becomes increasingly difficult to distract, manipulate, or discourage because his direction is no longer dependent upon constant reassurance. He trusts observation more than noise. He trusts disciplined action more than temporary emotion. He trusts consistency more than appearance. And through this trust, his focus deepens. At this stage, opportunities begin responding differently to him. People recognize steadiness in his character. They sense that he is not driven purely by ego, attention, or emotional impulse. This creates credibility. And credibility attracts access. For serious opportunities are rarely entrusted to unstable individuals. The man who remains composed, observant, and disciplined in speech gradually becomes someone others rely upon. His presence carries weight because his actions consistently support his words. This alignment between word and action creates influence naturally, not forced influence, earned influence, and earned influence compounds over time. The first $10,000 often arrives over time. The first $10,000 often arrives long after the deeper transformation has already begun internally. By the time visible results appear, the man has already learned restraint, observation, discipline, and clarity. The money becomes evidence of those qualities, not their source. Because true advancement always develops inwardly before it becomes visible outwardly. Let him then examine whether he speaks more than he builds, reacts more than he observes, or seeks validation more than mastery. Let him strengthen his discipline until his actions carry greater force than his words. For the man who learns when to remain silent often sees what others completely miss. And let him affirm with calm conviction, I move with clarity, restraint, and disciplined focus. I build more than I announce, observe more than I react, and through steady action, I create results that speak for themselves. And through steady action, I create results that speak for themselves.